Thank you for tuning in to ICT on PNC, a podcast covering issues that impact the Texas insurance industry. The Insurance Council of Texas is a nonprofit trade association serving the property and casualty insurance industry. We're proud to be the largest state-based insurance trade association in North America. Welcome to ICT on PNC. So thank you for joining us today for another program. April is Distracted Driving Awareness Month, so that's what we're talking about today. I'm very thrilled to have Dr. Art Markman with me today. Dr. Markman is a professor of psychology at the University of Texas at Austin, as well as the co-host of the popular Two Guys on Your Head podcast that airs every week on NPR and is available online. That's where he and his co-host, Dr. Bob Duke, go into all sorts of interesting anecdotes about how the brain works. Am I getting that right?
You got it.
Okay. Well, thought I might set the stage here for a moment, talking about why it's important, not just to the insurance companies that have paid out millions and millions of dollars in claims over the years due to distracted driving, but just for the real world implications. So a few data points here. The National Safety Council says that cell phone use while driving causes about 1.5 million crashes every year. Almost 400,000 injuries occur each year from accidents caused by texting while driving, and about 1/4 of all accidents in the United States is caused by distracted driving. About 8.5 of fatal crashes can be attributed to distracted driving, and it causes about 8 deaths per day. So every day, people are dying because they can't put down their phones or they are otherwise distracted. The NHTSA says about 10% of driving time, drivers are distracted. And this is something we'll get into later, but 47 states, including Texas, have put bans on texting while driving. More scary, 42% of high school students say they text or email while driving. And it's important to note that it's not just cell phone use that we're talking about. The Zebra, which is an insurance aggregator, in a survey earlier this year, saw that over 50% of people report eating while driving. 23% are admitting to texting. 12% are taking photos. 6% are applying makeup, and 3.5% admitted to drinking while driving. I thought this point was pretty interesting. Comparing Apple and Android users, it appears Android users are much more dangerous. 55% of those versus 40% of Apple users admit to using their cell phone while driving, and anecdotally, that totally makes sense to me that Android users are more dangerous. And this last slide I've got here kind of sets the stage for what we're talking about. Because when asked if they think that using a mobile device impairs their ability to drive safely, over half agree with that statement in some form. 57% roughly say that they agree that does cause it. Now, of course, in a world where we can't agree on basic facts, about 25% disagree that using a cell phone use while driving is dangerous. But I'd like to talk about those 50% that agree with that statement. If we can agree, and I think the data shows it, that distracted driving is a problem, why do people keep doing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. The fact is, though, of course, people do all sorts of things that they know they're not supposed to do. Most people who smoke cigarettes are aware that they're dangerous. Most people who, don't exercise very much are aware that they ought to do more exercise than they do. I think, there's several things that are going on when it comes to thinking about why people engage in distracted driving. And the first is that the consequences are significant, but the actual negative outcomes are rare, all things considered. That is, if about half the time that you did something distracted, you crashed your car, you stop doing stuff that's distracted. But the fact is that's not really what happens. What'll happen is most of the time you might look up and suddenly realize you need to stop short or swerve around something. And so and in fact, in many situations, you get away with it entirely because there wasn't anything going on the road that you needed to be paying attention to. It's the and so we're not really rewarded for acting in a way that fits with our belief.
Okay, can you explain that a little more? What do you mean by aren't rewarded?
Well, if in other words, the reward that, if I want to check my phone for a text, or if I want to, if I were someone who needed to put makeup on, and we're doing that in the car, I am rewarded for that behavior. If somebody who puts makeup on the car looks better when they get out, and
I
feels better
see.
about themselves when the person who checked their texts or their emails had the opportunity to engage with their friends, and there was no negative consequence most of the time. And so, continuing to perform the behavior makes perfect sense. So at one level, yeah, this is a dangerous thing to do, but on the other hand, it didn't hurt, right? And this is the same thing with, if you think about smokers, for example, they get some benefit from smoking that cigarette in the moment. They know that it has a negative long-term effect, but they're not experiencing that in the moment. So this is a classic kind of problem for human behavior, which is that something that's rewarding in the short term, but has potential negative long-term consequences. And so, unfortunately, after you've had an accident or a crash, it's actually too late then to go back and say, "Oops, I shouldn't have been doing that."
So even after people get in an accident or rear end somebody, they might still do it the next time.
Well,
So even if there
yeah,
is a negative consequence, why wouldn't they stop after that?
because there's I think the bane of human existence is really the activity that has its benefits in the short term, that where there's either an unlikely negative side effect or a long-term negative side effect. Honestly, right, if you look at I always like to say, if you look at the Bible and you say it's got a top 10 list in it, which is the 10 commandments, and you pull out a couple of them that have to do with follow this command, this religion rather than that one, right? Everything else on that list is actually about do the thing that's right in the short term, in the long term, rather than the thing that's right in the short term, right? So that person who just annoyed you, don't kill him. The thing, the pretty thing somebody else owns, don't steal it. And the very attractive person married to your neighbor, leave him or her alone. And those things are on the list, not because they're easy, but because they're hard, right? The list doesn't say eat regularly, breathe. Those are the things that we expect people to do. It's a list all about how to do the stuff that might have these really negative long-term implications for society. And worse yet, despite the fact that this is a list that appears in the best-selling book of all time, and by the story surrounding it was given by an all-knowing, all-powerful God, humanity still does everything on that list, right? So, for one thing, that tells us it's messaging isn't going to help us, because we're not going to have a better message than that and get people to change their behavior. But then on top of that, we have to realize that anything that has its benefits in the short term is going to be really attractive for people to do, even when there are long-term negative consequences for it.
Right. So this isn't a new problem. Cell phones have been around now for what, 15, 20 years? I think since the very first one came out, people started using it when they were driving. In fact, you used to put phones directly in your car. You used to have car phones that were
That's
hardwired
right.
into it. So perhaps that was poor planning originally, because people thought, well, you can have an actual phone that rings and you can pick it up and it's corded and you can drive with it. And wasn't until later that they started correlating that distraction with accidents. So I guess my next question is, are we getting better at it? And is that part of the problem?
We're not really getting better at it. So one of the things that happens is, we're remarkably bad at multitasking of any kind. We have known for 50 or 60 years worth of psychology research. We do a lot of work in the field in what's called dual task performance, which is a fancy way of saying doing two things at once. And what we know from all of those studies is do two things at once, get worse at both, provided that one of the things that you're doing can't be turned into a habit. So I'm going to qualify this just a little bit with driving. which is there are certain things we can do habitually. If you're an experienced driver, for example, driving on an open, uncrowded road, like a highway with no other cars on it is something that you learn to do by habit. And there's nothing strange going on. There's nothing sudden that you need to pay attention to. And if you've ever been on a kind of long drive before, I when I moved to Texas from the East Coast, I actually drove from New York to Austin, Texas. I spent many hours on the road. And if you've ever done a ride like that, you can sort of listen to an audio book or do something else and keep yourself on the road. And that's because you can do all that by habit. And being somewhat distracted doesn't actually impair your ability to carry out those habits. Where having a secondary task matters is when there are things that are unpredictable in the environment that you then don't notice. And so as soon as the second task requires any thought, that's when it gets disrupted, right? So this is so if you think about driving, if I could guarantee you that you were a professional driver on a closed course, driving on 50 miles on open road with no road problems, yeah, be distracted a little bit. It won't hurt you. The problem is you don't know when something is going to happen, when a truck in front of you is going to drop a tread, or an animal's going to run out in the middle of the road, or a car is going to suddenly stop, or any of those things. And if you have to be paying attention, as soon as you're distracted, you are impaired in that situation. And the worst part of it is that the brain regions that you use to switch back and forth between tasks are actually the same brain regions you use to monitor your own performance. So you are actually your own worst judge of how good a multitasker you are. If you so part of the problem is people think to themselves, well, I did great. I must be better than average at multitasking because everybody else on the road, they seem to swerve all over the place when they're on the phone, but I'm fine. You're not fine. You're just blissfully unaware of all of the goofy things you're doing on the road while you're putting your makeup on and looking at your phone and all that.
So as an interesting point, you just made a minute ago when you were talking about the, driving cross country, our cars now, and I just talked about how they used to, put car phones in the center console, but now they have these sound systems, they have screens like in the car. And so if you're listening to an audiobook or the Two Guys on Your Head podcast while you're driving, that can actually help you focus on the road at some point, right? So is there a good distracted driving?
Yeah, so that's the funny thing. Like I say, if you can guarantee that if you can guarantee that you're in, on an open, clear road, then having a little bit of distraction actually lets all those low level visual and motor sort of movement characteristics drive what you're doing. I mean, think about, for example, if anybody who's ever played golf or tennis or a musical instrument, you know that your best performance comes when you're not explicitly thinking about how to move your body. As soon as you try to pay attention to, like, where's my arm supposed to be, now you're going to screw up your shot, right? But if you don't think about it, that's when you do well because you just allow the practiced habit to carry out. So that's the funny thing is that little bit of distraction when all you're trying to do is to carry out a fluid motor movement is actually, it actually helps you. The problem is that you don't get that much worse at driving if you're paying attention, and you do get so much better at being alert to all of the unpredictable things that are happening on the road that are the ones that are actually likely to cause serious crashes.
So I have a 16-year-old. He's been driving for less than a year. He's had a device in his hands since he could hold a device in his hands. One of the data points that we covered at the beginning, it was in the survey from earlier this year, something like 25% of people admitted to using their cell phone while driving, but like almost half of teenagers are admitting to using their cell phone while driving. Does that mean it's getting worse? Are younger people better at it than older people? What is going to happen as the next generation of connected drivers hits the road?
Well, I think this is actually something that we've been seeing for a while, that we've had this kind of connected generation getting on the road. And I think there's several things. I mean, in some ways, if you go back to my generation now, which, is fading into history a little bit, we didn't have cell phones, but we still drove too fast and did other goofy things, in our cars. And what 16, 17, 18-year-olds do in their cars is different from what 25-year-olds do, which is why back in the day you couldn't rent a car until you were at least 25, and why your insurance rates go down as you get older, because you just get you feel, as you begin to feel a little bit less invincible, as you begin to take on a little bit more responsibility in your life, as you begin to have responsibility for other people, you change your behavior. And so, part of what's going on is just the normal, I'm 16 and nothing can happen to me, and I know better, and so, I think it takes a little bit of experience, of narrowly missing, another car, or having a little fender bender with the car in front of you, or any one of those other things that then gets people to go, okay, yeah, maybe I ought to listen to what other people are telling me. And so I don't actually think what we're going to see is a flood of people, um, now, like this generation is just going to carry that behavior through. I think like every generation, people are going to get a little bit more responsible as they get older. And of course, technology in cars is changing too, right? I mean, so one of the, I mean, which is a double-edged sword, right? But part of what's happening is we are putting more technology in place that is slowing cars down when you get too close to the car in front of you, and other things that are crash avoidance mechanisms. And they're not foolproof, but they're at least protecting people from themselves a little bit. So, there's going to be a kind of steady increase in the technology that helps not just to prevent people from doing things that distract them, but also from protecting them from the goofy things that they do when they are distracted.
So technology is both the cause of and solution to the problem. Is that?
It's the cause, and it's a solution. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I think in the end, getting people to park their phones, out of sight for a while is probably the better thing to do. And I think this is also one of these places where as parents, you gotta hold the line a little bit more too. And we have to encourage parents to really say, hey, look, I need you to park that phone, and there's going to be consequences if I discover that you haven't been doing that. And which is hard, because I know as a parent, when my kids got their driver's licenses, the last thing I wanted to do was take their car away, because once they could drive, I was off the hook on having to bring them here, there, and everywhere.
Right. And so let's transition a little bit to what works to stop, because you mentioned putting the phone away. That is apparently one of the best strategies to get people to stop driving, is to put the phone in the trunk, or to put it in the floorboard of the other side, or to put on the do not disturb mode. Um, the other thing that has seemed to work a little bit are these laws that have been passed in Texas. The law has been on the books for about 4 years now. And there was a statistical decline in the amount of accidents that were attributed to distracted driving. I think it fell like 6 or 8% in that first year. So what else can we do? Like, what, as an insurance company, is there anything that an insurance company can do to incentivize, or put some kind of technology out, or to have a driving log, or to how can we, as like, not only insurance companies, but as a society, what else can we do? And one of
Yeah.
the other things I'll note here, that law that was passed in Texas was only for texting and emailing. Still lets you use your phone as a map, or if you need a device, you can use it hands-free, which is arguably not any safer. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. So what can we do? How do we change people's behavior?
Yeah, so I always feel like we shouldn't reinvent the wheel on a lot of this, meaning let's look at some of our other successful attempts at changing behavior. And a great example there is cigarette smoking. So back in the 1960s, over 50% of American adults were habitual smokers. And if you go back and watch shows like Mad Men, you'd think it was 100%, but it was a little over 50%. And now it's well under 20%. And so you can ask, well, what happened in those intervening years? And some of it was education, but most of it actually wasn't. So the number one thing is that we've made it absurdly difficult to smoke. So that's the change in the environment piece and so finding ways to change the environment matters. So now you can't smoke in public buildings. Back in the day, you could go into a restaurant and there'd be a smoking section, as if that mattered. The smoke was wafting all over the place, but you could sit in a restaurant for several hours and have a conversation and light up your cigarette during that. And there were smoking sections on airplanes, for crying out loud, right? So
Right.
we've made it very difficult to smoke. We've made it very expensive to smoke. So a lot of states have, not Texas per se, but some other states have very high taxes on cigarettes. So it's actually really expensive to do it. Perhaps most important, we've created a lot of social disapproval around smoking. So, when I was a kid, there'd be, kids would get together with parents and there'd be parents smoking around the kids. And now, I can't even imagine situations now where, a bunch of parents would get together with a bunch of kids. If one of the parents felt the need to smoke and there were a bunch of young kids around, that parent would like walk 3 blocks away, have their cigarette, come back with, a mouthful of mints. I mean, we don't have the same level of approval for this either. And so all of those things I think have contributed. And so, if we think about distracted driving, it means we have to make it a disapproved behavior. If you're sitting in a car, and somebody in your car is tempted to want to check their texts, I mean, really, saying something right away matters, and offering to be the one to check a message if that's needed. Being a little bit more disapproving of other people on the road that you see doing that. We should create a hand gesture for it that would allow you to communicate without cursing at somebody. There are hand gestures people use, but I don't recommend them. But something we could do to just as a reminder to people, hey, that's not cool. We don't do that. I think that sort of disapproval matters. I think, again, changing the environment matters. And then can we make it more expensive, right? So are there ways of monitoring the behavior and maybe if you successfully avoid using your phone in the car, your insurance rates go down, or some other, there's some other benefit that comes from that affects your wallet. Because I think that those are the kinds of things that have worked for some of the other major public health concerns that we've had. And distracted driving is a public health concern. I mean, it
Yeah.
obviously it's a business concern to insurance companies, but it's a major public health issue. I mean, I want to put this into context for a second, right? You were saying 8 people per day dying as a result of distracted driving. I want to point out that we have paused giving one of the vaccines on the basis of 6 side effects and 1 death out of 7 million people given a vaccine.
Right.
That's I mean, let's so 8 people dying per day is a much more substantial public health threat than the side effect we saw from the virus. Yet we're from the vaccine. Yet we're taking that far more seriously than as a society we're taking distracted driving.
Yeah, really kind of interesting to compare the two and to compare distracted driving to smoking, and to treat it as a public health concern, because it is. And so that last the pie chart that I had, where it said 57% of people agree that it's a problem. That means 43% don't. So that's the people that we need to move the needle on, right? Like, just to get everyone to agree that distracted driving is a problem. And
Well,
so we
that's
have these months like April and I think October too, are these awareness months for distracted driving. I guess that works. I mean, that at least starts us talking about it.
It helps a little. I mean, I think part of the problem, of course, with that 54% is people who say I agree this is a problem also know that is the socially desirable response. And so not everyone who says, I agree that distracted driving is a problem, doesn't drive distracted. They just know that that's what they're supposed to say. So it's important
I
to
get it.
get people, it's important to get people to agree that it's a problem, but then also to find ways to align their behavior with that. And some of that involves making a plan in advance. So most of the time, I think most people can figure out a way to get from point A to point B in their car when they're driving without checking their phone. But the question is, what happens on those days when there's an important message that's about to come in? You know, you're waiting on the results of a big business deal, or if somebody you know is ill and in the hospital, and you're waiting to get So there's a compelling reason to want to get the message. What are you going to do at those times? And to really practice feeling the tension between, I know what I'm supposed to do, but in this instance, would it really be so bad if I did the wrong thing? And to give yourself a plan that helps you to do the right thing on those days when you feel compelled to do the wrong thing. And this is, again, if we look at examples of this. I mean, let's go back to cigarette smoking. There's, smoking cessation programs. Don't just sit there and say to people, I want you to commit to stop smoking. I mean, that's, how many former smokers who finally managed to quit had several years worth of New Year's resolutions where they said, I'm going to quit smoking this year, and meant it on January 1st, only to be a committed smoker again by January 18th. So you have to do more than just believe it, want it, and commit to it. You've got to have a good plan for what you're going to do on those days when you're feeling that tension. And it's really important to experience that. It's really important for the people who are teaching this, not just to say, don't do it, it's terrible to do it, but to say, I totally get it. I totally understand why you need to check this message right now. But you don't, it'll keep. It'll still be there in a half hour. And if it's that important, then you're going to find a place to pull over and check your message, and you're going to get where you're going a little bit later. You don't have to, one thing or the other has to be more important. Either it's more important that I get this message right now and I'm going to stop what I'm doing, pull over and check it, or I'm going to get where I'm going and the message will keep till I get there. But I have to feel the tension and have the plan, or I'm just going to give in.
So the comparison to smoking is an interesting one, in part because over the generations that people were smoking, and I'm talking, maybe prior to 10 or 15 years ago when it really became, the consensus that there is now. But you had hundreds of millions. I don't know how much to quantify it, but of counter programming of tobacco companies and cigarette companies saying, it's not dangerous for you, or they put it in movies and try to make it cool. There's not that happening with distracted driving. Even the cell phone companies agree that this is a problem, and you should not be using our products while you're driving. So that comparison to smoking is somewhat interesting, because there is no counter force that's saying, hey, it's all right, you can text and drive.
Well, there's no messaging. There's no messaging, but there's plenty of counter programming, but it's all internally generated. It's all internally generated because if I check my cell phone while I'm driving and I don't get into an accident, I have both achieved my little goal and I didn't crash my car. So it's, and that's the thing that matters. That's why I say it's not the messaging. It's not, you can have all the great messaging you want. You can have all sorts of images. You can have people who have suffered personal losses telling you their heartfelt stories on video. That is not going to change people's behavior. What's going to change people's behavior ultimately is is making it really difficult and really expensive to do the wrong thing, so that we eliminate the fairly small probability that somebody's going to engage in, is going to text and drive or email and drive or do something else distracted and get in a crash. I mean, that's the fundamental problem is we're looking at the law of numbers here, right? What the law of large numbers. You're engaging in a behavior that has a reliable but tiny increase in the probability that you're going to have a serious consequence. And the problem is because of the millions of people who are driving every day, some number of people then fall prey to that consequence. And so the overwhelming probability is that if a particular person is driving distracted most of the time, the overwhelming probability is they are never going to have a serious consequence for that. The problem is some people will. And those serious consequences are really, really expensive. And these are very hard things for people, very hard kinds of decisions for people to make. So is everybody here in Texas, we're just 2 months past Snowvid. And of course, lots of people lost power. Why did we lose power? Well, in part, a lot of companies didn't winterize their power plants. Why? Because it's expensive. There was a serious short-term reason not to want to be prepared for a potential winter storm. But once that winter storm came, the consequences were enormous. And that's the parallel situation. Is we've got something where the short-term benefit of doing something is tangible and powerful, and there's this vanishingly small probability of a negative event, but those negative events are gonna happen eventually, and when they do happen, the costs are catastrophic. And that's the place where we need a lot of external support to help us because humans left to their own devices are going to keep doing the wrong thing. And that's one of the reasons why the technology solutions that car manufacturers are creating that make it harder for people to rear end a car in front of them, that help to keep people in their lanes and things like that are such an important part of the solution because we will probably find ways to reduce the number of people who drive distracted to some degree. But if we can supplement that with technology that also reduces the magnitude of the consequences, that's going to help.
So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. One of them has to do with, I think, positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. He's got a question about, will drivers adopt telematics products or like a tracking thing on their phone or a monitor? Would they, as a positive reinforcement, so you get rewarded for the right behavior? His question is, do you think there's a resistance or fear of Big Brother for tracking data like that? And so can you go into that? And then also, what works better, positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's do the positive versus negative first, and then we can talk about the likelihood of adoption of some of these technologies. So in the short term, negative reinforcement tends to work better. If I want, I mean, parents know this. If you want to get your kid to clean your room right now, you say, if you don't clean your room right now, so help me, right? You threaten. And then, whereas, come on, clean your room, then we'll do something fun. The kid's already doing something fun. So now you're telling them, go clean your room, go do this thing you really don't want to do. And then you get to do something that's as fun as the thing you were doing right now. That doesn't work very well. So we use threats in the short term. The problem is that over the long term, threats have other negative consequences because we find ways to, what we want to do is avoid the threat, not to do the thing you wanted someone to do as a result of that threat. So kids find clever ways of just throwing all their clothes under the bed or something. They don't actually clean the room. They just do the thing that avoids the threat. And the same thing is true with any other kind of punishment. We're just, it becomes a game of, I'm trying to avoid the punishment. I'm not necessarily trying to do the thing that you wanted me to do. I'm going to find the easiest way to avoid the punishment. So in the long term, using positive reinforcement is a better thing to do because what you're doing is getting people to find some positive reason for wanting to do the desired behavior. Now, the problem fundamentally is the most effective kinds of positive reinforcements are the ones that are what are called intrinsic to the task you're doing. So for example, the people who go to the gym most often are the people who like going to the gym, not the ones who get the most reward, some external reward for doing it. They're the people who just like the gym. And the people who read the most are the ones who like to read. And so it's, part of the problem we have with trying to reward people for not checking their cell phones is that the thing that's intrinsically rewarding is checking your cell phone and getting the message or the seeing how many social media likes you got or whatever it was.
Yeah, right.
And so what you're trying to do is to substitute something that's intrinsically rewarding for something that is what's called extrinsically rewarding, where there's an external reward for doing it, and that's going to be a little bit less effective. It's going to be better than trying to punish people over the long term, but still, trying to gamify something like that works best when what you're doing is gamifying it till people realize that they actually enjoy the thing that you're trying to get them to do, which is unlikely to happen in a situation in which the behavior you're trying to get people to do is to stop doing the thing that's intrinsically rewarding right now. I mean, I'm just trying to lay this out. It's hard. It's hard to do this. That said, there are things that you can try to do that will increase the importance of that. So, for example, if we could make gas less expensive for people, if they were consistently not using their cell phones, if we could guarantee that their insurance rates were going to be discounted, if you could prove that they weren't, those are things that could potentially help because if it's really affecting my ability to actually drive, which is the reason I wanted to get in the car in the first place, then I can do something that is directly related to the activity itself that might then be a reward for engaging in this positive long-term behavior. Now, will people adopt this kind of technology? We all complain about the prospect that somebody's watching us, but if you look at the degree to which people don't seem to care about their privacy when it comes to social media and other things, I think that's not going to be a huge concern. People just, every once in a while, people get all bothered about a particular app for a very short period of time. But the fact is, at this point, the social media companies, the app companies, the credit card companies, they know so much about us at this point from all of our electronic footprints that one more app is probably not going to be the thing that pushes us over the edge.
I got it. Yeah. So if positive reinforcement works better over the long run, and people are amenable to having their location and activities tracked, perhaps there is some kind of solution here. Insurance companies already put some of these trackers in cars, and you get a discount if you're not driving too fast or you're driving at the right times of days. Like there are some of those programs that exist already. Another question that we had come in, is there any technology for as far as the phone where it restricts your ability to text while the vehicle is moving? I think that already does exist. Like you can put your phone in do not disturb mode. So perhaps you tie those two together. The telematics tracker, it knows when you're driving, and if you have an app on your phone that correlates the two and you're not using your phone while your car is in motion, you get a discount or you get some kind of reward.
No?
So it seems like there is something as far as that vein that you could come up with, and it might work.
Yeah, I think it certainly is a step in the right direction. Again, I think you have to, when you look at, I like the smoking example because there was no magic bullet there. It wasn't like there was a single law that was passed or a single thing that happened that suddenly drove smoking rates down. It's a combination of things that work for different people in different ways. And so what I would say is these are great potential solutions, and they will influence some people. And the more people you influence, the more that you are reducing the risk. Because the thing about distracted driving is there are two kinds of crashes. One of which is an individual distracted and then doing something goofy. But then there's also if you've got, the more people you have that are distracted, the more people on the road that are doing goofy things, which just creates more uncertainty on the road for everyone who's on the road, which can cause just more unpredictability and more opportunity for additional crashes. So there's all sorts of reasons to want to see the number of people who are driving distracted reduced.
Yeah, yeah. What so the problem of distracted driving, I think that we can agree it's a problem. Um, Most people will say yes, it's something that I shouldn't do, and I do it anyway. Um, it's a learned behavior, and it's a habit that has developed over a long time. And as you've said, you've been positively reinforced with every successful trip that you make that you didn't get in a wreck. So how long does it take to, I don't know if deprogram is the right word, but I've been driving now for almost 30 years, gosh. And in the last 20 years, I've been guilty of doing this habit that we're talking about. Is it going to take me another 20 years to unlearn it?
No, the funny thing is you can actually learn new habits fairly quickly if you need to. So to give you an example from the driving domain, if you think about people who have switched from gasoline-powered vehicles to electric vehicles, one of the things about electric vehicles is that they have regenerative braking. So while your foot is on the accelerator, you move faster. And if you start to release your foot from the accelerator, because the cars tend to capture energy from the wheels or that they're capturing, actually they're spinning the motor backwards in order to recharge the battery. What you get is actually the car slows down. So it takes people about a week to figure out that you don't coast in the electric vehicle the way that you used to coast in a gas powered vehicle. So it's not, even if you've been driving for 30 years, it doesn't take you that long to figure out, oh, I got to drive this thing differently than I drove my other vehicle. And so if you can get people to engage in a new habit, then in the span of a couple of weeks, you can get people to do something that's just completely different from the thing that they've been doing in the past. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 20-year ordeal, but there needs to be a consistent habit, a consistent behavior, and people just, you need to do it often enough that it becomes a mindless activity. And the way it becomes a mindless activity is that you basically are laying down memories that say, when I sit down in my car, I do this thing. So I'll give you another example from driving. We went 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, from opening your car with a key, putting the key into the steering column and turning it to start the car. And now you keep the key in your pocket and you press a button for
Right.
most cars. Well, there was a period of maybe a couple of weeks in there where people would pull out their key and jam it against the steering column and in an embarrassing way. But we didn't keep doing that for 20 years. We did it for a couple of weeks, and then we realized, oh yeah, just keep it in your pocket and press the button. To the point now where I rented a car not long ago that I needed to use the key to get it started, and I sat there with with the key in the pocket going, wait, what do I do?
Where's the button? Yeah.
Right, despite having, 30 years of experience of driving a car with a key. So it doesn't have to take that long, but there needs to be a consistent approach. And the trick is to do the same thing every time you get in the car. Get in the car, sit down, put your phone in the center console, and then drive off. And if you engage that same routine over and over again, or if you're carrying a purse or a handbag or something, put the phone in there and throw that in the back seat or in the trunk. Whatever it is, do the same thing over and over, and that will give you the best possible chance of creating a new habit fairly quickly.
So we've got the law that we've got the authorities that have created the law. That's a negative consequence that you risk. We've got the real world results. If you get in a wreck, you might get hurt, you might kill someone, damage your car, insurance rates go up. That's a negative effect, a real world negative effect. I guess what's really missing, and where insurance companies might be able to fill the void, is that positive reinforcement to change behavior.
Yeah.
If some companies can figure out a way to track the cell phone usage and get people to adopt that program and then incentivize it, that could be something that fills that void there of the long-term positive reinforcement. Is that kind of where we're at?
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes a lot of sense.
All right. Well, 45 minutes come and gone. I've been looking forward to this conversation for literally years. So I appreciate you taking some time today to talk about this with me. I think that where I'm at now is that there is something that insurance companies can do. They can find a way to incentivize good behavior to establish new habits that might be long lasting, at least
Yeah.
until technology saves us from ourselves and creates cars that don't crash. Right.
There you go. Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. Well, it was great talking with you today about this.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us again. This will be available on our website as well. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
See you.
Thank you for listening to this edition of ICT on PNC. Find us online at insurancecouncil.org for more information about our organization or about the property and casualty insurance industry in Texas.